So, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim and Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everyone. So, today, inshallah, we're continuing, of course, with Surah Al-An'am, and you could see um, we're still within these ayat. وَلِتَصْغَى إِلَيْهِ أَفْئِدَةُ الَّذِينَ لَا يُؤْمِنُونَ بِالْآخِرَةِ. We last time covered وَكَذَلِكَ جَعَلْنَا لِكُلِّ نَبِيٍّ عَدُوًّا شَيَاطِينَ الْإِنسِ وَالْجِنِّ يُوحِي بَعْضُهُمْ إِلَى بَعْضٍ زُخْرُفَ الْقَوْلِ غُرُورًا ولو شاء ربك ما فعلوه فذرهم وما يفترون. And we talked about some of the details. جعلنا لكل نبي, we talked about borders. We talked about how recognizing one's identity is basically one key to recognizing the borders of who's outside of that identity. In other words, we're speaking about an identity and you're recognizing that there are certain people that don't actually belong within your orbit, and even prophets had done the same. They basically had, every single prophet had adu. They basically had enemies, and these enemies, this isn't just to create enemies, okay? This isn't just to say, hey, I've got some enemies right there. That's not what makes you good. What makes you basically a person that will by default have enemies is when you stand your grounds in supporting justice, in supporting tawheed, in supporting truth. That definitely will provoke those that are harmed by the justice that you are supporting, by the truth that you are advocating for, by tawheed that you are believing in. That in itself will provoke the shayateen al-ins wal jinn. In other words, keeping in mind that just by you, for example, putting your hijab on, you're going to see others triggered by your commitment, whether in hasad or whether in hate or whether in opposition. Just because you stand your grounds, just keep in mind that others are going to be provoked by seeing you standing your grounds and your commitment. That's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was saying, well, لِكُلِّ نَبِيٍّ عَدُوًّا شَيَاطِينَ الْإِنسِ وَالْجِنِّ. Are going to be shayateen al-ins wal jinn that are going to be in opposition, of course, feeling threatened, or even perhaps even envy, by the way, or sometimes feeling that by you standing your grounds that will endanger their interests. And this is extremely important to keep in mind, because oftentimes we would see the ayat letting us know that don't necessarily always think that you have to be dragged in a conversation or in a debate, and that sometimes you have to recognize that certain people are not to be debated. Certain people you just have to keep away because they're not ready to listen. That these people are not ready to listen. So you putting in and wasting your energy to somehow try to prove a point or try to put in your energy to get to that person's mind and heart. Some people, they don't want to listen. Some people, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells you, well, what you need to do is a'rid anhum. What you need to do is that sometimes you just have to, that's it. You had delivered the message, and then therefore at the end, فَذَرْهُمْ وَمَا يَفْتَرُونَ is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling you. That if these people are يُوحِي بَعْضُهُمْ إِلَى بَعْضٍ زُخْرُفَ الْقَوْلِ غُرُورًا, if these people, they're just following a rhetoric, and these people are not even listening to the words that you're saying, they are just considering one figure perhaps as their center, or sometimes one cult or one group, and they're not willing to process what you're saying, then in that situation, just recognize that these people are following blindly a certain rhetoric, and that what you are trying to bring forth in terms of evidence, they're not even processing it. That's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us, number one, is that they would have ghurur. They would have this arrogance and not willing to listen. Number two, وَلَوْ شَاءَ رَبُّكَ مَا فَعَلُوا, to let us be aware that at the end, this is a form of a threat that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is letting you know that every single prophet, their duty was to deliver the message. Their duty is to deliver the message. And even in life, listen to this one. Even in life, not every single argument, not every single disagreement, not every single person, battle, whatever you want to call it, you would necessarily engage in or think that you should invest all your effort in that. There are going to be a lot of distractions. If, for example, you're going to respond to this person at school and that person at work and that person perhaps on the street, and each and every single disagreement or opposition or every single person that might put you down, that you're going to put in the effort and feel that I have to defend myself, I have to show them who's in power, then be sure that you're not in power. Because no matter who you are, if you open too many battles, that whether you are the most important country, whether you had all these ammunitions or whatever you have, in the end, opening too many battles is basically going to let you lose your effort in focusing on one target. If you open too many battles, you open too many disagreements, you're going to, at the end, absorb and you're going to waste your energy. So that's the same thing when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was teaching us. There are certain groups, فَذَرْهُمْ وَمَا يَفْتَرُونَ. There are certain groups you just need to let them go. Don't hold on and don't keep on wasting your energy. If you know that person and their mindset, and you recognize that these people, they have no duty, they have no mission in life but to basically drag you into these side conversations, then you have to recognize who these people are. That's being socially mature. You are trying to make an activity in the masjid, but other people are trying to create a scene. Some people, they don't want to see other people doing activities, so they don't want to do similar activities because it takes so much effort and so much energy. So what will they do? They will basically drag you into side conversations, trying to defend yourself, trying to defend a number of different things, etc., putting accusations. Why? Because they're not capable of putting so much effort as you are doing all that effort to do these activities at the masjid. So they will basically do an easier type of childish play just to distract you, or distract even the attention in order, instead of seeing your activity basically done at the masjid, they'll basically do these sidetracking attitudes and behaviors just to basically distract you from what you're doing in order to have everyone see them. Some people, it's just an issue of envy. So you have to be aware, you have to be wise, you have to be mature. Not every single battle out there, even if you were going to be capable of winning that battle, you would engage in it. There are many battles that you would have to فَذَرْهُمْ وَمَا يَفْتَرُونَ. There are many battles that you just have to avoid. Why? Because those battles, they'll basically deprive you of your energy to do what is right. And that's why على قدر أهل العزم تأتي العزائم. The people that aim high, they don't focus on what's low. When they aim high, those are on the lower ends. They don't even give them the attention that they're seeking. So they might say a word, thank you for your information, and just move on. And rather than think that they're going to, start responding to each and every single person that's probably causing a scene, a drama, distraction away from your focus. And that's one thing, is that shayateen al-ins wal-jinn will use support from one another to distract not only those that are working in high goals, but even when it comes to Anbiya. Therefore, الشياطين, in order to distract the prophets from their mission, they'll use al-ins wal-jinn as their tools in order to distract the prophet's focus, or distract the leader's focus from focusing perhaps on their children, maybe focusing on their homes, maybe focusing on the activity they're trying to do in the masjid. And they'll basically do all these different scenes, or probably come up with some random thing that you are so surprised that anybody would say such a thing. So don't get dragged to their area without you realizing. Shayateen al-insi wal-jinn work together hand in hand to distract the prophets, to distract those that would take the prophets as their role models, and distract those that are aiming high by creating different people to work in shayateen's on shayateen's behalf. Okay, so how do I know these people? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala basically said, فَذَرْهُمْ وَمَا يَفْتَرُونَ. In the other ayah, فَلَا تَكُونَنَّ مِنَ الْمُمْتَرِينَ. How do I know these kind of people? Number one is that, we would see, and right now people are talking a lot about narcissists and all of that, and we could see that there are some people that use the type of gaslighting, in different ways, and distracting the harm that they are causing. They'll basically accuse you of committing the harm. Why? Because what they are trying to do is distract and make you sit in defense instead of you speaking about the harm that they are causing. You basically get dragged in trying to defend yourself, that no, I didn't mean the harm, I don't mean to do this, no, you misunderstood, etc. So you end up not focusing on the harm that they had committed, but you start getting dragged into trying to defend yourself. And that's what shayateen al-ins wal-jinn would do. They would distract the people that are on a mission, and make them somehow feel compelled to defend themselves. So that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was telling us about these people, that they are not looking for faith. They are not looking for guidance. What they are looking for is really misguidance. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was letting us know that He will not fall for their gaslighting, when they had said, we want you to make a Safa into a mountain of gold. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, they're not even going to believe. They're not seeking evidence, they're seeking arrogance. And I'm not going to give it to them. And they will right there, even if they were to see the angels with their own eyes, and even if the dead were to talk to them, they will not believe, because they are just wanting to distract the masses, distract you, even as the one as a prophet to deliver the message. They're trying to distract the masses, distract away from the main point of focus, to basically distract the masses as well, and basically get into that يوحي بعضهم إلى بعض زخرف القول غرورا. That they would basically give that iha. Now, subhanAllah, just keep this one in mind when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when we talked about al-malaika, for example, giving support during the battle of Badr, during the battle of Uhud, or giving the mu'mineen support, or even when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had basically said that the malaika would also give support for the mu'mineen, and the support for the mu'mineen, whether it's in preservation, or whether it's in guidance, or whether it's in giving them ilm as well. So just different inspirations that the malaika would give versus the shayateen. In contrast, the shayateen, what do? Well, يحزن به الذين آمنوا. They would basically inspire you. And of course, the word inspire is more of a positive thing, but I'm still going to use the word inspire because I cannot think of a word that would be equivalent to al-wahi. The word wahi simply means a hidden signal, and a word or a message that was sent, or that was given to you as a signal, and not necessarily we're speaking about a direct communication. So that's why you look at al-wahi, for example, whether that was for Nahl, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had said that he gives wahi for bees, that he gave wahi for Musa, even though she was not a prophet. So there are certain things that you could sense, and that would be some sort of wahi. So for al-anbiya, for al-salihin, or even for different things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala might give guidance to, that it would be coming from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and also al-malaika as well, basically giving guidance, even if we're speaking about things like rain, wind, etc. They would be a wahi from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to move them towards a certain end, or a certain force, or a certain trajectory. And of course, al-malaika, or Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, would only give wahi for good. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us that he would only give wahi, and the mu'mineen, la khawfun alayhim wa la hum yahzanun. That would be a type of wahi. لا خوف عليهم ولا هم يحزنون. They do not feel fear, and they do not basically get into that depression and sorrow. Why? Because with that wahi, they would be alerted in how to view the world, how to view the future, how not to look into the past, how with that dhikr, you're redirecting your vision from seeing trauma to seeing hope, from seeing pain to seeing gain, to seeing treatment, from seeing fear to seeing security. So al-mu'min, they would connect with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that's the main wahi that they would get. The main wahi that they would get is the inspiration from dhikr, the inspiration from salah, the inspiration from al-Quran. That's the main thing. Can I actually say, hey, I got this signal and a gut feeling? And by the way, women are more likely to depend on gut feelings than men. This is what studies say. Women are more likely to trust their gut feelings than men for a number of different reasons. All right, don't want to go into those reasons to why this is the case and analyze why this is the case. Certainly, women in the relationship with their body, in the relationship with their feelings, is basically let's say, stronger than men and their relationship with their body. They're more having let's say, a relationship with their mind than their body. Even though they would recognize pain, and certainly, of course, from one person to another, their relationship with pain, or even how their body relates to pain, is different from one person to another. But of course, this is something that we can see different studies basically doing, just different scanning on the brain. I don't want to go into that area, but I will say one thing is that within Islam, keep that one in mind. Within Islam, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does, in the hadith as well, we do see an indication that women may fall in fitna as a confusion, or let's say, because of the confusion between what type of wahi is this. What do I mean by that? How do I know if this is satanic, shaitani wahi, or this is malaika wahi? This is key. Because many will confuse the two gut feelings, the two inspirations, and they end up thinking of a shaitani wahi as if it was coming from a sign from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and letting you know something. Number one, because you cannot depend on a gut feeling to help you make those decision makings, it's extremely important to first go back to the Quran and Sunnah. That's number one. If something contradicts Quran and Sunnah, be sure that this is a wahi from shaitan, not from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent us the Quran and Sunnah as the wahi in order to give you guidance. And therefore, if something contradicts Quran or Sunnah, know that this wahi is coming from shaitan, straight forward. Number two, if something is not necessarily contradicting Quran and Sunnah, then I would want to go for maqasid al-sharia. I would want to look at the trajectory of whatever decision I'm making, and what are the pros and cons, and where is this taking me? Is this taking me towards what Sharia wants to take me to, or what Islam wants to take me to, or is this taking me, or a possibility of taking me elsewhere? Now, it is very common that some will use what is called al-hiyal. What is al-hiyal? Al-hiyal is self-manipulation. Self-manipulation, and certainly Ibn al-Jawzi had talked a lot about this. And al-hiyal and self-manipulation, whether it's al-fuqaha using it on themselves, and talbis iblis, and shaitan will come in and put in a halal label on something and tell you, well, you're seeking to get married, so it's okay if you would talk to these guys, and it's okay, you're just the trajectory, what you're aiming at is basically marriage, so it should be halal to talk to guys, it should be halal to dress up and reduce from hijab, because what you're trying to do is just attract for the sake of marriage, for example. Okay, now it's important to keep in mind that these types of self-manipulations and these types of hiyal are basically things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had warned us of. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala warned us of these hiyal because of their power, whether you're a person in fiqh and tell you there are differences of opinions between scholars on that one, it's okay. You can actually do this haram thing. And yeah, maybe you don't have to call it haram. You can probably call it a different name. That way you won't feel guilty about it. Remember, differences of opinions between scholars. And you find yourself basically getting into zandaqa. What is a zandaqa? Is zandaqa, there are different ways to get to zandaqa. What is zandaqa? Is zandaqa is basically when a person is putting on an appearance of Iman or Islam, when in reality, what they contain within them is a complete discrepancy with what Islam actually carries and what Islam actually says. So you would, similar to a munafiq, but الزندقة is more related to al-aqidah. المنافق, there are two kinds of munafiq. There's the munafiq aqidah and munafiq amal. Munafiq aqidah, a person that puts on, let's say, an appearance that they are Muslim, but what they are hiding is that they're actually not Muslim, but they're getting some benefit from putting on an image or at least an appearance of Islam. That way they can get acceptance, for example, or maybe help and money from the masjid, or maybe the support from the community. Okay. And they'll put on an image and an appearance that they are Muslim. النفاق العمل, the hypocrisy of behavior, is that they are believers, they are Muslim, but their behavior, so on the inside, they're Muslim, but their behavior is a behavior of a disbeliever. That's why the Prophet ﷺ said, آية المنافق ثلاث إذا حدث كذب وإذا وعد أخلف وإذا اؤتمن خان. That the signs of a hypocrite are basically three signs. When they speak, they lie. When they promise, they break their promise. And when they're trusted, they're basically betraying the person that trusted them. So what does that mean? They didn't live with the integrity or religious integrity that they were supposed to be embracing. They were basically in contradiction between their aqidah and their recognition of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala overseeing what they're doing. And then therefore in private, they would create lies, they would betray, they would not live the commitment of principle. Okay, so that's nifaq amal. Zandaqa is when the person and what they would say about faith is completely contradicting what faith really stands for. That's a zandaqa. So when you look at al-hiyal can lead to zandaqa. Al-hiyal, the self-manipulation, it can lead to zandaqa, that a person may claim that they are practicing something as to what the religion teaches, and they'll use a form of hiyal, self-manipulation, to say, well, I'm doing ijtihad here because I'm trying to avoid harm 1, 2, 3, 4, and yes, I'm trying to, Islam tells me, and they'll use the general statements in the religion. Like what? For example, Islam tells us that women are equal, and Islam tells us that women also are to be granted their rights in a way that gives her dignity, etc. Oh, I absolutely don't disagree with anything that you had said. But then the premise that they started out with is completely different than all the details. The details, they'll cherry pick from different details, for example, and say, well, I don't have to do the iddah for talaq, because anyways, he was harming me. I don't even consider him as a husband, because anyways, he was abandoning me, and therefore I don't have to do iddah talaq. Wait a minute. No. You just made your own way of making ijtihad. That's not at all an acceptable ijtihad. There are scholars that we would go back to help us understand the parameters of Quran and Sunnah, and that way we don't fall in what shayateen may manipulate us into, and we would think that we're following Quran and Sunnah. And this is very common, that people would take certain quotes for example, in Islam or in Quran and Sunnah, and then they would use that as the premise and then not considering the different details and tell you that, yep, right there, I have a coherent ijtihad based on Quran and Sunnah, when the truth of the matter is that there were a number of different discrepancies. You used a general statement, and in a statement that had certain details and intricate details, basically in the Quran and Sunnah, to tell you that that contradicts what you are doing, but you refuse to look at that detail and just wanted to use a certain premise or a generalized statement and make your own fatwa. How do I protect myself from such hiyal? You protect yourself from such hiyal by going to scholars to help you understand what you are doing and help you understand and make sure that you are processing, understanding what is at stake through the lens of Quran and Sunnah, and not through your own, let's say, interest or your own interpretation or your own narrative. You go back to the scholars. The scholars are the ones that are going to help you read the data, that the reality that you're going through, and also read the text that goes and fits the data that you are trying to propose or you had basically come with, and to make sure that you are not confusing your reading and confusing your interpretation or confusing your Islam, thinking that it is a religious interpretation when the truth of the matter, it was a shaitani manipulation. And this is extremely important. Go back to Quran and Sunnah, not necessarily yourself, unless you're specialized. And even if you were specialized, you would need to see other scholars to make sure that they would endorse that ijtihad, that they would approve that ijtihad, or they would approve that your vision and your reading was actually accurate, and that it's basically coming from Quran and Sunnah and not from shaitani inspiration. That's why it's important to go back to the mufassirin, to the fuqaha, to the muhaddithin, to make sure that we're understanding Islam based on al-wahy from number one, from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through Muhammad ibn Abdullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, then through the teachings that Muhammad ibn Abdullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam had taught the Sahaba, and then from the Sahaba that had taught basically that taught that taught the tabi'in and so forth. And keep in mind that whoever would follow other than سبيل المؤمنين نوله ما تولى. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَمَن يَتَّبِعْ غَيْرَ سَبِيلِ الْمُؤْمِنِ نُوَلِّهِ مَا تَوَلَّى. You follow other than the path of the mu'mineen, then نُوَلِّهِ مَا تَوَلَّى. Then you're going to be held accountable for the trajectory of what and the consequence of what choices you are making. Now, this is extremely important to keep in mind, that part of al-wahy that we would be getting as an inspiration is sabil al-mu'minin. Yes, I would follow Quran and Sunnah. I would also follow number two, basically what the Sahaba had taught, etc. But then number three, sabil al-mu'minin. You follow other than sabil al-mu'minin, then you're the one that's going to be following your own self-manipulation and shayateen, and without you realizing that you had basically been manipulated into a certain idea. Just keep that one in mind. If you are an outcast with the salihin, with the ummah, with those opinions that scholars had made in the past, then doubt yourself before you start doubting them. Doubt yourself before you start doubting the ulama and the salihin. Doubt yourself that you're probably getting wahy shaitani. And this is extremely scary. How do I protect myself? You would protect yourself by making sure that you humble yourself and go back to the scholars to make sure you're getting the right interpretation and not a satanic manipulation. Okay, so we went in details with this one. يوحي بعضهم إلى بعض زخرف القول غرورا. And I believe we left at this one. Let's say we left at this one. Was it? هل للإنسان شياطين? Yes, we talked about this one. And here we go. This is where we left off. وذر الذين yeah, this is where we left off. ولتصغى إليه أفئدة الذين لا يؤمنون بالآخرة وليرضوه وليقترفوا ما هم مقترفون. What is ولتصغى? What is تصغى? تصغى actually means to bend, but not necessarily to bend like you're bending something solid. But no, it's more of leaning towards something. ولتصغى إليه أفئدة الذين لا يؤمنون بالآخرة. So لتصغى, they're bending towards, or what's bending? الفؤاد. So how is الفؤاد going to be bending? الفؤاد itself, I thought you said it meant to cook something, to warm something. How is that? الإصغاء is to bend towards something. Are they necessarily listening to it? They're not necessarily listening fully, but they're giving a body gesture. Okay, الإصغاء is initially, it comes from a body gesture. What does that mean? So الإصغاء is more that, you know, when, let's say you hear somebody talking and whispering, and then you kind of lean forward to get yourself closer to hearing what is being said. That's الإصغاء. Okay, you are not necessarily participating in the conversation, but you lean forward just to get a better maybe closeness, or maybe just to get a better position to listen to something. You probably might silence the people around you just to be able to hear better, etc. So that's الإصغاء. Now, when you look at تصغى إليه أفئدة الذين لا يؤمنون بالآخرة, الفؤاد is the core of the heart, is the core of that heart. The core of the heart, when a person is engaging in a behavior that they are getting closer to whatever was to whatever was inspired by shayateen al-ins wal jinn, it will basically affect them, and it will still penetrate in their heart, and it will basically affect their behavior. So who are those people that are leaning towards some kind of this kind of whether it's rhetoric, or whether it's the wahy, the narrative that shayateen al-ins wal jinn are basically doing? So who is basically listening to this? They're basically the ones الذين لا يؤمنون بالآخرة. لا يؤمنون بالآخرة. They don't listen. They don't believe in al-akhirah. So are they necessarily listening to it? Well, they're just giving attention to it. And what happens? Well, they're just leaning towards it. They're not necessarily fully 100% engaging in that conversation, but because they're accepting it, because they're giving it attention, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلْيَرْضَوْا. They will then get into stage 2. So stage 1 is listening, even if it wasn't that tentative. Stage 2, وَلْيَرْضَوْا. It's basically when they would be content over it, they would embrace it, they would normalize with it. وَلْيَرْضَوْا. Stage 3, وَلْيَقْتَرِفُوا مَا هُمْ مُقْتَرِفُونَ. And then what is al-iqtiraf? Al-iqtiraf is to create some kind of a behavior and to inflict something. That's al-iqtiraf. It's to inflict something. So when you say وَلْيَقْتَرِفُوا, that is telling us that in terms of, and this is actually one of the key ayat why I had to leave the US. Listen to this one. One of those key ayat. لِتَصْغَى إِلَيْهِ أَفْئِدَةُ الَّذِينَ لَا يُؤْمِنُونَ بِالْآخِرَةِ. In the beginning, you're probably saying, well, I have nothing to do with the American mainstream or the kuffar's life, etc. But without you realizing, your children are still in their early stages. لِتَصْغَى إِلَيْهِ أَفْئِدَتُهُم. Their hearts are listening, they're observing, they're looking around, they're seeing you are different. Why are you pushing me to go to memorize Quran? Why can't we have boyfriends and girlfriends? Why can't we get into their life seems fun? Why are you keeping us away from all the fun? وَلِتَصْغَى إِلَيْهِ أَفْئِدَةُ الَّذِينَ لَا يُؤْمِنُونَ. And then وَلْيَرْضَوْا. Then they start getting normalized with it. Little by little, they'll absorb that lifestyle. That's stage 2. Stage 1, they're seeing it. They're hearing it. They can see whether it's through their friends, they're telling them about probably the circus that they went to, or probably the game that they were playing, how fun it was, or probably the day that they had slept over and they did a lot of fun games, it was so fun, etc. Or probably the day they went to the movies, or probably the day they went walking and they had just a nice walk at the mall, etc. Or the day they went bowling, wherever, all these different lifestyles. What happened? وَلِتَصْغَى إِلَيْهِ. They're just listening. Are they engaged in it? You as a parent, you're probably keeping them away from this lifestyle. But then they're young children. تَصْغَى إِلَيْهِ أَفْئِدَتُهُم. Their hearts are like, yeah, it seems fun. Looks like something that is really attractive. Yeah, can I do that too? Why am I the one that's not given a phone? Why am I not the one that's given all this fun? How come my friends get to sleep over? Why are you so strict? Why are you always telling us no, no, no? How come all the other kids get to? And then تَصْغَى إِلَيْهِ أَفْئِدَةُ الَّذِينَ لَا يُؤْمِنُونَ بِالْآخِرَةِ. They don't recognize, when it's a child, they don't recognize the whole idea of Yawm al-Qiyamah, the whole idea and the philosophy of purpose precedes your existence, and all that philosophy for a child and the whole idea of it. They don't necessarily understand it fully yet. That isn't something that they can fully understand until they probably get mature. And even if you were to tell it to a person that is probably an adult, they may not fully comprehend it. They might tell you, I don't believe in it. Because when we look at maturity, al-fu'ad, a lot of what is cooked in al-fu'ad comes from the environment that you expose yourself into, that you put yourself into. And this is extremely important to keep in mind. Just like previously, we had said, well, why were their hearts closed? And we said a couple things. 1, يجهلون. 2, يفترون. 3, مقترفون. 4, يعمهون in طغيانهم. Yes, we said their behavior. But for this, they didn't yet commit any major sin. They don't even know what drinking feels like, what zina feels like, what this world. They're still in their early stages. They never experienced any of that fitna. But you want to keep in mind, for a younger child, they still don't know this world, but out of curiosity, it might take them into this world out of curiosity, and especially in their teenage. And what if you didn't have the power? They started working, you said no phone, but they managed to get a phone. They managed to basically drive, get a permit, drive, and then you lost the communication, or let's say that you lost the power of who they're communicating with, because right now they have the phone, they've got social media. And 2, transportation. Now they could just go out and just basically use the car keys and just drive out. You lost the transportation, you lost the communication, and certainly the place of education, the school is providing the so-called education, when in reality it's an indoctrination. What did I say? What do we get? We basically, right there, تَصْغَى إِلَيْهِ أَفْئِدَةُ الَّذِينَ لَا يُؤْمِنُونَ بِالْآخِرَةِ. Their hearts will then cook something else out of the environment that they're being basically exposed to, that they're surrounded with. And then وَلْيَرْضَوْا. Stage 2, they'll start finding some acceptance. يَرْضَوْا. They'll start accepting this lifestyle. They'll start embracing that lifestyle. They'll blend with it, because we want to remember, especially children, they don't learn through whatever philosophy you are probably trying to explain. They don't learn based on the idea. They learn through mimicking. They learn through replicating your behavior. They learn through mimicking the society that's around them, not through the idea and the philosophy behind it and the objective to why we wear hijab and why we pray and why. In the beginning, the Prophet ﷺ basically said, "Allimu abna'akum as-salat." Teach your children how to pray. You basically, yes, it's a form of direction. It's a form of giving direction. I want you to get up and pray. I want you to go do wudu. Here's how you do wudu. Here, remember when in that hadith, al-Harith, when he said, or is it Malik ibn al-Huwayrith, when he said, we were with the Prophet وَنَحْنُ شَبَبَةٌ مُتَقَارِبُونَ. And the Prophet ﷺ, that he felt that they had missed their families. And then the Prophet ﷺ instructed them that أَقِيمُوا فِيهِمُ الصَّلَاةِ. Amongst them, you be the one to show them how prayer is done. You be the one to basically be the one to resemble how to do proper hijab, how to do proper salah, how to do proper hygiene, how to do proper studying, how to do proper let's say honesty, all of that this is part of what you practice, and they will mimic what you would do. That's the first stage of teaching. But children don't only learn from their parents, they learn from the society as well. وَلْيَرْضَوْا. It becomes something that they would accept. And then وَلْيَقْتَرِفُوا مَا هُمْ مُقْتَرِفُونَ. And then they would engage in whatever they would engage in terms of al-iqtiraf, in terms of crime, in terms of sin. And then it becomes out of hand. وَلْيَقْتَرِفُوا مَا هُمْ مُقْتَرِفُونَ. أَفَغَيْرَ اللَّهِ. Let's look at here. Let's see the word صغى, okay, in another ayah, of course, in surah التحريم. فَقَدْ صَغَتْ قُلُوبُكُمَا. The ayah says, فَقَدْ صَغَتْ. Let me highlight it for you. فَقَدْ صَغَتْ قُلُوبُكُمَا. Your hearts basically listen to it. Okay, so at the end, الإصغاء is الميل. And in the hadith, فَأَصْغَى لَهَا الْإِنَاء. The hadith for Abu Dharr al-Ghifari, that there was this cat, and basically he أصغى لها الإناء, أصغى for the cat, the utensil, in order for it to lean and bend, in order for the water to basically accumulate in one side so the cat can drink from it. And then that is basically Abu Dharr's wife, she objected and she said, you're going to drink from the same utensil that the cat is drinking from. And he told her that the Prophet ﷺ said that cats are min at-tawafina alaykum at-tawafat. Would I drink from the same utensil that a cat drank from? The answer is no. There's a difference between tahara and perhaps other and health. Okay, yes, in terms of tahara, it's tahir, but we know that there are different parasites in cat saliva, etc. So I would not drink from the same utensil. I would not eat with the same utensil, etc. There's a difference between perhaps maybe in terms of tahara, yes, it's tahir, but in terms of other forms of cleanliness, I would take that in consideration as well. So yes, in terms of tahara, it's tahir. All right, let's say in the other, وَزَعَمَ بَعْضُهُمْ أَنَّ لَامَ الْأَمْرِ. Here, other qira'at and other scholars had said it's, okay, here we go. What do you want? وَلْتَصْغَى with the lamb. وَلْتَصْغَى, not وَلِتَصْغَى. وَلْتَصْغَى. And al-Qurtubi said and objected to this and said, and that is erroneous. That's wrong. Why? He said, because with this lam al-amr, he said, that's actually wrong to read it as wal tasgha, as an imperative lam right there, because this isn't telling them to listen. Okay. And it's no one's forcing them. But no, they are putting K, that is basically, they are using that. In other words, this wahi, that this type of narrative that they were living amongst and living around and exposing themselves to is what led them to give it a listening ear to this type of conversation, to this life of this type of lifestyle, etc. And then stage 3, well, this is stage 1 right there. They were surrounding themselves with this type of environment, with this narrative. And then stage 2, لتصغى إليه أفئدة الذين لا يؤمنون بالآخرة. And then their hearts basically started listening to it, absorbing it. And then stage 3 or stage 4, يرضوا, they would accept it. Stage 5, يقترفوا ما هم مقترفون, it becomes a behavior that they themselves will engage in. They themselves will start committing these types of sins. Okay, so now let's move on right there. The scholars that said it's وَلْيَقْتَرِفُوا, which with an imperative lam, with a sukoon with the lam right there, that's an imperative lam. They said that this is a form of threat. It's tahdid. It's not telling them. So here, وَلْيَقْتَرِفُوا. Notice that wali, not وَلْيَقْتَرِفُوا. Other scholars said that it could also be وَلْيَقْتَرِفُوا with an imperative lam. But this imperative lam is not telling them, hey, you're obligated to engage in sin. But it's a form of threat. It's kind of like a mother telling her child, you know what? Go ahead, don't study, and you'll say. She's not telling him not to study, and that somehow he's going to see something nice. No, absolutely not. She's saying, go ahead, don't study. That's a form of threat. Okay, it's a form of threat. And certainly, that's the same thing with the لغة عربية. وَلْيَقْتَرِفُوا, this is a form of threat. It's like, go ahead, commit the sins that you would want to commit. We're going to basically hold you accountable later. Now, good news. You see what you got right there? What does it say? It says تم الجزء الثامن من تفسير القرطبي. So we're done with this volume, and we're going to go to the other volume. But before I jump onto the other volume, let's see right there. Let me get Tafseer al-Qurtubi, okay, for the other volume. There we go. I already prepared it for you. And here we go. Let's see. Let's go into it again. الجامع لأحكام القرآن والمبين لما تضمنه من السنة وآي القرآن. That's the name of that book. It's the same book that we were doing, but this one was the 8th volume, and now this is the 9th. Okay, how many in total are they? In total, this copy at least, this copy is 23. Okay, let's say, and here's Abi Abdullah Muhammad ibn Ahmad ibn Abi Bakr al-Qurtubi. Al-Qurtubi means he was from Qurtuba. Where's Qurtuba? Basically in what is today called Spain. Okay, this stat right here means tuwuffi, or he was Tariq al-Wafa, basically. The date of al-Wafa is 671 Hijriya. Okay, let's see. Tahqiq basically means the scholars, or at least the team that overviewed the different hadith, the different references, the different ambiguous terms, and then he'll basically, in a footnote, basically explain all of those. Okay, let's see who else was there to do this tahqiq. So number 1, Abdullah ibn Abd al-Muhsin al-Turki and al-Qasusi, and this one. Al-Juz' al-Tasi', this is our 9th volume. So by the way, 23 volumes, but the 23rd and the 22nd volumes are actually just references, and they're basically kind of like a glossary. All right, let's go move on right there. And certainly, let's see, this is printed in Beirut, Lebanon. So just for us to say, okay, let's see. Now we're going for the following ayah. So now that you see that the ayat are telling you what not to be, what should I be? أفغير الله أبتغي حكما وهو الذي أنزل إليكم الكتاب مفصلا والذين آتيناهم الكتاب يعلمون أنه منزل من ربك بالحق فلا تكونن من الممترين. Okay, what's the difference here? Let's look at this, right? Let's see. أفغير الله. This is coming as a form of, is this an interrogative clause? No, it's basically an informative clause in a form of a question, or in a form of giving you like a way to tell you, well, am I going to do that? And what in reality it's telling you is that it's giving you it's letting you answer the question, because you would recognize that and certainly affirm the answer that I'm asking you to basically attest to. Okay, so أفغير الله أبتغي حكما. Am I going to seek other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as hakaman? What is al-hakam? Now the word abtaghi means seek. So am I going to seek other than Allah Almighty as a hakam, as a ruler? And he is the one that set down the book in details. And those that we had given the book, they would know that it was revealed from your Lord Almighty in truth. So do not be from those that are argumentative. And it was complete, the word of your Lord Almighty in truth and in justice. No change to his words. And he is all hearing and all knowing. Now that was a poor translation. Let's go in details first, and then we'll see what it says. أفغير الله, am I going to seek other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? أبتغي. What is al-ibtigha? Al-ibtigha is to seek something. What do you mean by seek something? So it's when you define morality, when you define truth, when you define the world around you, there are a number of different references that you would go to. You're either going to go based on your experience, making it anecdotal, or you're going to use certain experiments and basically making it as empirical, different experiments, and you're going to use to explain the experiments, you're going to use a certain interpretation, okay, which would fall under a dhann, or you're going to use your senses and your gut feeling, which is al-hawa. Okay, so, or you're going to use al-wahy as the reference. Okay, so when you say that, all of that basically falls under epistemology. What would be considered as a credible source of ilm, as a credible source of knowledge to help me basically make sure that I'm not confusing the shaitan wahi with the wahi that is, let's call it divine, let's call it angelic, let's call it good. Okay, now we said before that if it contradicts Quran and Sunnah, that's shaitan wahi. If it leads to sorrow, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, يَحْزُنَ بِهِ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا. If it leads to sorrow, it basically is shaitan. If it leads to sin, it's shaitan. If it leads to a trajectory to harm the society or harm oneself, it's shaitan. It's shaitan. And that's why you would say, for example, in a lot of mental illnesses, you would say that, like I said, for example, that with shaitan, it basically, shaitan would order you for staying away from hygiene, water is dangerous, stay away from people, stay in the same clothes, etc. And then they will basically get so indulged in lack of hygiene because they would think that that's what's going to bring them comfort. That's what's going to bring them comfort. And sometimes we have to battle ourselves against what shaitan is inspiring us to do. All right. Now, having that being said, and of course, whether we're speaking about hygiene or whether we're speaking about behavior, then therefore Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is letting us know, أبتغي حكما. Al-hakam is different than al-hakim. The root is hakama. Hakama. Hakama actually means to judge. Hakama, to judge or judged. Okay. Hakim, let's write it down, right? Let's write it down. So we got the root is hakama. Hakim is the person, the judge himself. And hakaman is basically the center that you judge based on. So that's al-hakam. So what does that mean? That's basically letting us know, am I seeking other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as al-hakaman, not al-hakiman, but hakaman as the center, as basically the reference that I would go to define truth, to define justice, to define the world around me, to define life, to define everything that surrounds me. Rights, responsibilities, sahih, batil, wajib, fard, makruh, haram, etc. All these different areas. That's basically to go back to the reference, and that is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So how do I know what to do? I mean, I don't have a direct relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to know. Yeah, he said, وَهُوَ الَّذِي أَنزَلَ إِلَيْكُمُ الْكِتَابَ مُفَصَّلًا. So he's like, oh, well, yes, I had revealed the kitab for you. What kitab? It says al-kitab, it says al-ahdiyya, to mean the book, al-Quran. This is specifying referring to al-Quran. And what about it? Mufassala, there are certain details in it. Oh, wait a minute. I mean, the Quran doesn't have all the details. Al-Kitab, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us that He had sent al-Kitab wa mithlahu ma'ah. What is mithlahu ma'ah? Something similar to it along with it. What is that? What is that other reference? What is that? That's basically the Prophet. That's mithlahu ma'ah. That's a sunnah. Sunnah and the Prophet ﷺ were basically considered as the practical demonstration and explanation of how to understand the Quran. وَالَّذِينَ آتَيْنَاهُمُ الْكِتَابِ, and the ones that, the word is آتَيْنَاهُم. Well, wait a minute. Am I the one that got the book? I mean, it was the Prophet, not me. Right. The Prophet ﷺ got the book. But when you embrace it, as if it had come to you, when you embrace it, when you apply it, as if it had come to you, they would be the ones, يَعْلَمُونَ أَنَّهُ مُنَزَّلٌ مِّن رَبِّكَ بِالْحَقِّ. They would be the ones to know that it was revealed from your Lord Almighty in truth. Wait a minute. So, آتَيْنَاهُمُ الْكِتَابَ يَعْلَمُونَ أَنَّهُ مُنَزَّلٌ. So why munazzalun? Why not just kashifun from al-kashf and not a tanzil? What's the difference? Al-kashf, why am I using that term? Because that's the term that Sufis like using, al-kashf. I'm going to comment a couple of things on it. Al-kashf is when something is revealed. And if you were to look at a lot of English translations to the Quran, you would see that the word revealed is commonly used instead of the word sent down. Even though the ayah was saying munazzalu, not reveal. Reveal comes with the mystical, from a mystical mystical foundation. What is the mystical foundation? A mystical foundation comes from an agnostic, from agnostic, not agnostic, but from a Gnostic view. What is the Gnostic view? The Gnostic view relates that people on earth, basically, they would get some form of getting an inspiration and direct knowledge from the divine. This isn't like wahi, like Jibril alayhi salam. No. This is like a direct relationship with God. And that's a very dangerous thing to say. And that's where a lot of Sufis are not all on the same boat, by the way. Not all on the same boat, but you do have some very perverted interpretations, and especially those that would tell you about kashf. Because what it would assume is that this person with a certain level of piety, a certain level of faith, that they would get a direct revelation, a direct knowledge that would be sent to them or that would be given to them, and that they would be capable of seeing beyond the barriers, which basically al-hujub, beyond the barrier, whether it's hijab, whether it's al-ghaib in this life, or whether it's the different types of ghaib, whether it's the ghaib of time or the ghaib of place or the ghaib, etc. And they'll give you all these different things that this shaykh basically had reached the level of al-kashf. It had reached the level of al-kashf, and therefore they went beyond all the barriers that acted as an obstacle from seeing al-ghaib, so they had a direct connection with Allah. And believe it or not, some of these Sufis, not all, because Sufis are different groups, and sometimes the word Sufi puts everyone inside that category, and which is actually not accurate, by the way. Not all Sufis are believing in all of these, and yes, certainly some will, but that's absolutely not fair to put all Sufis within the category of the extreme Sufi interpretation. It's absolutely not fair. You cannot say that Tijaniya is at all even close to, for example, Qadiriyya. This is completely different. Al-Mawlawiyya is not the same as perhaps maybe Shadhiliyya. Maybe they have certain similarities, but this one's different. This one's different than that one. Anyhow, so when you look at the main core of that idea, in considering that this person had reached a high level of faith, that this person is getting direct inspiration from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and to the point that some of them had said that they're even closer to Allah. Al-awliya are even closer to Allah than the Prophet himself. How? They said, well, the Prophet got the inspiration through Jibreel. This person got the inspiration directly from Allah. Just imagine, once you get to the level of thinking that a wali is better than a prophet, then that, if that is not zandaqa, I don't know what he is. And this is real. Okay, so when you look at the interpretation, to interpret as revelation and not something that was sent down, it mainly comes from the mystical interpretation that is basically more common, especially in the West. We could see some mystical interpretation, some mystical influence when it comes to interpreting the religion. And you have to be really careful with that. Mystical interpretation can sometimes use rhetoric, can sometimes use figurative words, and not necessarily what the words are actually carrying in terms of meaning within a lugha. And I would say I would find a lot of the motivational speakers use a lot of these types of mystical interpretations. Not every mystical interpretation is necessarily wrong, but if the language itself is not using this word, but then in order to sound inspirational, I would change the words, I would change the meanings to sound mystical, to sound inspiring, then I have a problem with that, because it's a form of manipulation. Because it's a form of changing the words. It's a form of editing the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's why it's important to go back to the tafsir itself and really see what are the words really saying. When you look at the word anzala, munazzalun, it is definitely and directly saying that it is something that was revealed from up to down. From up to down, because that's what tanzil means. But al-ityan is different, because al-ityan is from ataynahum al-kitab, is within the same. So let me, maybe I can draw it for you. Okay, so al-tanzil is from high up down. Al-ityan is this way. Okay, is this way. That's al-ityan. I give you something, that's basically giving it to you, basically from this direction to that direction. We're exchanging. Okay, that's al-ityan. Okay, now it-tanzil is going down, up from down. From up to down. Okay, فلا تكونن من الممترين. فلا تكونن من الممترين, and do not be amongst those that are mumtarin. What is al-mumtari? The person that is argumentative. What is a person that is argumentative? An argumentative person is not seeking the truth, but they're seeking a different center. They're seeking themselves. What does that mean? So when for a mu'min, they would consider, let's look at this one. For a mu'min, they're seeking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as the center, as al-hakam, as the center. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is asking you not to be from al-mumtareen, because al-mumtari is considering whether, one, the cult as the center, or whether a figure as a center, or whether themselves as the center. That's al-mumtari. Al-mumtari is getting into this argument, not looking at truth, and not considering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as the center of truth, but considering either their mind, or probably whoever they're believing in, Freud, or I don't know, John Locke, or whatever it is, as basically the reference to truth. If you think that this philosopher, or say, or claim that, yeah, I follow science. Well, science in itself is basically the research that we had done. But even that research is not infallible. Our own research contains a lot of flaws, because we don't have all the data. We may get some information explained, we may get to some data, but how we interpret this data is going to depend on a lot of different biases. A lot of different biases. Who's interpreting the data? How do we explain the data? How do we interpret? It's not necessarily the data in itself explaining itself. And especially if we're talking about humanities, it's completely different than solid science. So whether we're speaking about political science, we're talking about philosophy, we're talking about psychology, we're talking about literature, all of that, that's not solid science. It has to do a lot with human interpretation, and human interpretation carries with it a number of different factors that lead to a certain interpretation. We don't just separate ourselves from our environment, from our gender, from our experiences. All of these different factors play an important role in how we generate an idea and how we generate a certain judgment. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us, فَلَا تَكُونَنَّ مِنَ الْمُمْتَرِينَ. Don't be amongst those that would debate based on a center which is their own selves being the center, or a certain figure being a center, certain figure that is, a certain figure that they would consider as the role model, or perhaps a lifestyle that is, let's say, a Western lifestyle, liberal lifestyle. It's like, oh, this is human rights, this is women's rights, this is this. It's like, okay, says who? Says who that this is supposed to be women's rights, or this is children's rights, or this is human rights? Says who that this is how we define rights? Who defined it that way? Who's the one that we would turn to in giving us these definitions and these parameters, and what makes something moral, immoral, right, not right, justice, responsibility, whose rights, all of these different things. So that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then tells us, فَلَا تَكُونَنَّ مِنَ الْمُمْتَرِينَ. Don't be amongst those people, because the second that you lose your place of orbit, you lose your centricity to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then you're going to find yourself basically confusing your parameters. وَتَمَّتْ كَلِمَةُ رَبِّكَ صَدْقًا وَعَدْلًا. What is the word tammat? Tammat, that means it was complete. تمت كلمة ربك. In another قراءة كلمات ربك. تمت كلمة ربك. What is تمت? That was a complete. كلمة, and notice that كلمة was with an open تاء and not with a تاء مربوطة. كلمة was written with an open تاء. Wait, why? I thought kalima was kalima with a ta' marbuta. Just like you would say shajara. But guess what? In Surah Ad-Dukhan, shajarat is with an open ta' and not with a closed ta'. Go see it in Surah Ad-Dukhan. In Surah Al-Isra, shajara is with a closed ta'. So why? This is called al-Rasm al-Uthmani. Rasm al-Uthmani. Right, let's write it down. What do you mean by Rasm al-Uthmani? Like who, which Uthman? Rasm al-Uthmani. Okay. So what is a Rasm al-Uthmani? Rasm al-Uthmani, the Prophet ﷺ, when he was with Katabat al-Wahi, when the Quran was revealed, the Prophet ﷺ would order the Sahaba, Katabat al-Wahi, they would be the ones to scribe the Quran. And when they would scribe the Quran, the Prophet ﷺ would oversee what they're scribing and say, open the tab, circle the meme, do this with the bat, and etc. But I thought the Prophet ﷺ was illiterate. That's a huge conversation that we would do, inshallah, at another time. But the Prophet ﷺ, just as he was giving them the direction what to write, he was also giving them direction on how to write it. On how to write it. So وَتَمَّتْ كَلِمَةُ with a ta that's open right there. And even in Lugha Arabiya, in some accents until the time of today, they might say hayat. Okay, even if you were to stop at it. So in some accents, the ta if you would continue the sentence, it would make it into hayat, for example. It would become a ha. But in some accents, which is a lugha Arabiya that was based on certain tribes, even if you were to stop at it, it would still be hayat or tammat, or sorry, not tammat, but kalimat. All right. So is everybody understanding me here? So when does this become a ha and when does this become a ta? According to certain accents. Okay, what do we mean by according to certain accents? Al-Quran is revealed in the accent of Quraysh, based on the accent of Quraysh. But certain qira'at may not be on Quraysh's accent. Certain qira'at can be on different approved accents. They were also revealed based on an approved accent that the Prophet ﷺ himself had received the revelation in that other accent to read it in that. So that's why you would see other qira'at. Okay? وَتَمَّتْ كَلِمَةُ. Why is it written in that open ta? توقيفي, and based on الرسم العثماني. Okay, you still didn't answer the question, Uthmani. Who's Uthman? Uthman bin Affan. Uthman bin Affan, so he's the one that wrote the Quran with an open ta? No. The Prophet ﷺ ordered that it would be written that way. And then during the time of Uthman bin Affan, he basically had appointed Zayd ibn Thabit to write the Quran to make sure that it does not get lost, just like other scriptures were lost. Okay, so Zayd ibn Thabit, actually appointed by, it was, well, Uthman bin Affan and Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, basically. Okay, and during the time of Uthman bin Affan, that was basically something that was final. Abu Bakr as-Siddiq was the key figure to basically put Zayd ibn Thabit to write the Quran. Uthman bin Affan basically made sure that all the other masahif were burnt to avoid any misleading in what the actual mushaf really was. تمت كلمة ربك صدقا وعدلا. تمت كلمة ربك صدقا وعدلا. The words were completed by your Lord Almighty in sidq. What is in sidq? Meaning in the resource that it came through, that it was basically in complete one. Integrity from the Prophet ﷺ, integrity from Jibreel alayhi salam, and full truth to let you know the reality of things from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. All right? That's in opposition to what the Shia would say. Shia would say that the Jibreel alayhi salam, he was supposed to send, at least not all Shia are the same. Okay, you got Ithna Ashar, you got Ismailiyya, different Shias, okay? All right, but some Shia, let's say it that way, they would consider that al-Wahy, basically, or the Kitab itself, was not complete. And therefore there's a Mus'haf Fatima that is yet to be revealed. And the Quran that you have today is incomplete. That's kufr right there. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَتَمَّتْ كَلِمَةُ رَبِّكَ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, تَمَّتْ كَلِمَةُ رَبِّكَ. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, إِنَّا نَزَّلْنَا الذِّكْرَ وَإِنَّا لَهُ لَحَافِظُونَ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala took it upon himself to preserve the Quran. So when he says تمت كلمة ربك صدقا وعدلا, صدقا, whether Jibreel alayhi salam to give the exact and to give the complete revelation, or whether Muhammad ibn Abdullah basically sadiq to reveal and to basically deliver the message, and that's that delivering the message, that's آتيناهم الكتاب. So a proper translation for the word آتيناهم الكتاب is delivering al-kitab, is delivering the book. Because remember, basically goes this way. أنزلنا is sending down. Okay, so when you look at تمت كلمة ربك صدقا وعدلا, صدق, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala only would deliver the message of the truth of things, no change, no alteration, and لا مبدل لكلماته, no change in the words of the Lord Almighty, and therefore whatever He had said is basically what He had ordained. And adla, al-adl is basically justice. That's to let us know that kalimatullah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the words in the Quran, or the words sent unto the Prophet ﷺ in practice, okay, that this contains all the truth and this contains all the justice. And therefore, لا مبدل لكلماته. What is mubaddal? Baddala is basically to change. Mubaddil is one, to alternate, to change, the one that is changing, okay? It's in mubaddil, can refer to the person and can refer to the action. Mubaddil can refer to the action, can refer to the person. Li kalimate, for his words, not li kalimate. So wait a minute, so why here is in singular, at least in this qira'ah? Because in other qira'at, تمت كلمات ربك صدقا وعدلا لا مبدل لكلماته. So this was plural and so is this. In this qira'ah, رواية حفص عن عاصم, تمت كلمة ربك. By the way, حفص عن عاصم, just a note, side note to keep you, I guess, focused a little bit. حفص عن عاصم, not Ibn Asim. Asim is the teacher. But guess what? Who's Hafs then? Hafs, or sorry, let's start with Asim. Asim got married to Hafsa's mother. Hafs was the stepson for Asim. But I want you to keep this one in mind. A stepfather can be a father that can take care and give ilm. And look, he granted his stepson the ilm. And who was the true son for Asim? It was his stepson. Whenever you would say Hafs an Asim ibn Abi Nujud, you would remember that Hafs was actually his stepson, and who carried Asim ibn Abi Nujud's name? It was basically his stepson. And this is something to keep in mind. You can have a stepson, and you can have a stepdaughter, and you can have you can have someone that you may take care of and may actually be the person to carry your name and carry the legacy, even though they were not your biological kids, or probably the ones to be the ones to live, to carry your name in the DNA, but they carried it in the legacy. That's amazing. وهو السميع العليم. وهو السميع العليم. And he is السميع, the all-hearing and all-knowing. Why all-hearing? Because kalimatullah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you hear it. Al-Alim, he knows all, and therefore al-Haq, because it is Haq, and because it contains a sidq, and because it contains al-adl, it comes from ilm. In order for something to be complete honesty and complete justice, there has to be ilm. If you don't have ilm, then you don't know the complete truth of something. And to have ilm, you need to apply it. That's where adl comes in. That's where adl comes in. But what about as-Sami'? As-Sami', because they're words. You know, which is worse, being blind or being deaf. Being deaf is way worse. Way worse. Why? Because it makes you totally mute from hearing al-ilm, from relating with the world around you. Communication is key for understanding. But you can be blind and be a alim, and a great alim. But it's almost impossible to be deaf and be a alim, unless you're probably alim in other things, but communication is key. Right now, for the deaf, they definitely have advanced by far, giving the resources and giving them the opportunity to learn, read, and understand. And it's quite amazing. But before, that was not available. I find that world fascinating. Those that work with children and people with disabilities find it amazing, and what they are doing is definitely very, very inspiring. Very inspiring to see those that work with people with disabilities and how they make those disabilities into great abilities, that even the people that may have these abilities could not have done these things. This is amazing. Okay. وَإِن تُطِعْ أَكْثَرَ مَنْ فِي الْأَرْضِ يُضِلُّوكَ عَنْ سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ. And if you were to follow the majority of the people on earth, where they would guide you away from the path of Allah. يَتَّبِعُونَ إِلَّا الظَّنَّ وَإِنْهُمْ إِلَّا يَخْرُصُونَ. They would follow speculation. وَإِنْهُمْ إِلَّا يَخْرُصُونَ. Wait a minute, so what is the context of this ayah? Because remember, you would say most of the people, they would follow shaitan's wahi, and they would basically say, well, everyone else is doing it. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is letting us know, just because everyone else is doing it, it doesn't make it the truth. It can be satanic inspiration that happened to get acceptance from the majority. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَإِن تُطِعْ أَكْثَرَ مَنْ فِي الْأَرْضِ يُضِلُّوكَ عَنْ سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ. You follow the majority of the people, they will actually misguide you away from the path of Allah Almighty. So what is that supposed to mean? Is that giving me the inference that most people are wrong and that very few people are right? Yes, that's one inference. Most people are wrong. Most people are deviant. Wait, why would you say that? Remember, وَالْعَصْرِ إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ لَفِي خُسْرٍ إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ. إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ. The word al-insan, verily, all mankind are في خسر, in complete loss. The word al-insan is an inclusive one. إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا, except. When you say except, that takes out a small grip. Except those that believe, وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ, and do what is right. إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ. And then what? Well, the ones that would be in faith, and that would be in iman, the ones that would be in determination and consistency with al-iman, and the ones that would be in consistency with al-amal as-salih, are the ones to basically make it. All the others are going to be in khusran, are going to be in loss, are going to be in basically in deviation. So when you look at إن تطع أكثر من في الأرض, what is الطاعة? الطاعة, the word تطع right there, الطاعة is to follow. What is to follow? In اللغة العربية, when you say الطاعة, is basically to obey. to obey someone. What does obeying someone mean? Whether you are obeying as aware of what you are doing, or whether you're just doing something as in replicating because everyone else is doing it. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was taking us right there into letting us know that the disbelievers, let's look at it right here. What did the disbelievers do? Well, the disbelievers wanted to basically point out that the Muslims were a minority and that they cannot be on haqq. So they used the system, the psychological type of warfare, to mock the Prophet ﷺ and basically ask for different materialistic miracles, not for the sake of believing, but for the sake of putting down. And that was their ghurur. That was their wahi. Shayateen were giving them these inspirations to fall in that. And then it became وَلِتَصْغَى إِلَيْهِ أَفْئِدَةُ الَّذِينَ لَا يُؤْمِنُونَ. And then you would have the masses following. Now, what is that supposed to mean? That there would be leaders, only few leaders would be the ones to basically be the ones that are shayateen, the ones that are leading the masses. There would be a few leaders, and then the majority would basically just follow. It starts out with giving a listening ear, and then it becomes something that they would accept. Then they would basically embrace it as a fact and a culture. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is letting us know that there's one hakam, there's one center, that is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that if you were to follow the majority are just following speculation, a certain interpretation which keeps changing for a number of different factors. And then inhum illa yathrusun. What is il-khars? Il-khars is to take the branches and the branches from palm trees. They would take the branches from the palm trees, and these branches that are usually dried, the branches that are, let's say, dying out branches, you would see certain twigs, certain branches, they're dying out, so they would take it out, they would trim it, just like you would trim a tree, okay? They would trim these pieces out, and then they would take these pieces that are trimmed right now, well, let's make use of it. So they would make mats with it, they might use it in brooms, they might use it in just different ways, okay? So that's al-khars. It's like they're trimming out different pieces that are really not useful, but they'll make use of it anyways. Okay, that's what il-khars is. Okay, so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, "Inhum illa yakhrusun," which basically means they're trimming out different pieces, taking it out of its context, out of where it belongs, and then they would basically create something out of these things, and then they would create something with it, and then they would present it as if it is something useful. Fair enough. It would be something useful that, instead of just throwing these things away, but the truth of the matter is that you recognize that these pieces were of dead pieces. You recognize that this dhan, where's the metaphor here? Dhan itself, it's a piece of interpretation that is based on speculation, but then another dhan comes with it, and another dhan comes with it. And then for the person that's listening to all of this, they don't recognize that these pieces are actually all made of dhan, all made of speculation. They would think of it as something that is coherent. And this is extremely important to keep in mind, because when a shayateen would give al-wahi, a shayateen would give you little fragments. These fragments of wahi little by little, you would start connecting these pieces together and it becomes a narrative. And this narrative starts becoming a manipulation. Little by little, this becomes a certain culture. It becomes accepted by the masses. And then they manage to manipulate the masses and it becomes yakhrusun. Yakhrusun, another meaning, another word for it is yakdhibun, that they would be lying. How does this lying take place? This lying takes place compared to il-khars, compared to the way that they would take these pieces of fragments from the tray and trim it from the tray, and then they would connect them all together and they would come up with this mat or with whatever they're probably putting to make maybe a ceiling or make just different things. But the truth of the matter is that it is weak. In itself, it is weak. In itself, it is not formidable to be considered as a coherent and as a strong thing to last long. In other words, just a matter of time to basically let you know that this isn't going to last long, and it's basically made of hay or made of different twigs that had been dried, that had basically died out, and then therefore it will be dhan after dhan, and then later on people may not even realize that this is incoherent, but then most people would fall for it as if it was something that contained as-sidq and as if it was something that contained al-adl. Why these two things? Every single philosophy stands on two things. Keep this one in mind. There's a center of how you view the world. And then there's the other piece, which is the implication of it. So that's where we would see an ideology, and then there's the legislation that comes out of it. There's no such thing as a culture coming from vacuum. No such thing. Your vision and your understanding of life and understanding of truth and etc., that's basically going to determine the culture that people are living in. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us to focus on tawheed. If you don't have your tawheed in place, then certainly you're not going to know how to go back to the legislation / the fiqh / the Quran and Sunnah in terms of practice and how to apply it. And even if somebody were to say, well, atheism doesn't have a legislature because they consider that there is no truth. Yes, it does. That's why they would consider that there is no truth. So postmodernism is postmodernism, existentialism, and all these different isms out there. Well, not all of them, because, all right, but a lot of these different isms out there that would stem from the whole idea of that there's no truth, that there's no foundation to turn to, that there's no paradigm, there's no reference to turn to in truth. Then we're talking about chaos. Then we're talking about chaos. Then we're talking about the centricity of mankind. And even the centricity of mankind is basically missing out on a number of different coherent pieces. So they'll start trimming with al-khars. They'll start trimming. Yes, there's a piece of existentialism, just like John Paul Sartre. And then there's that other piece. Well, let's do another philosophy in regards to women. And then there goes feminism. And then, well, then they would choose to not even define the definition of feminism, or define the definition of postmodernism, or define the definition of this and that. And that's basically because they consider that there is no paradigm and no reference to turn to. So it keeps on changing, it keeps on changing. And that's إن تطع أكثر من في الأرض يضلوك عن سبيل الله يتبعون إلا الظن وإن هم إلا يخرصون إن ربك هو أعلم من يضل عن سبيله وهو أعلم بالمهتدين. For your verily, إن ربك, your Lord, knows who is astray or going astray away from his path, and he knows who is part and included in al-muhtadeen, and who the real muhtadeen are, and who the ones that are guided truly are. Who's al-muhtadi? Muhtadi is basically the one that is following the guidance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this is it. Inshallah, tomorrow we're going to see well, actually, we need to get to al-Qurtubi first. But inshallah, we'll get to al-Qurtubi tomorrow. It's not going to be much because those ayat are pretty straightforward in a number of different ways. So we'll see al-Qurtubi right there. And then, inshallah, you could see he doesn't go in a lot of details. And then we'll continue, inshallah, in the following page. Remember, mashallah, congratulations for those that had been, studying with us from the very beginning. You completed one whole volume. That's pretty good. Okay. And well, right now we're on the 9th volume. So stay tuned. Maybe you can complete the 9th volume with us. Let's see where this 9th volume goes up to. Hold on. Let's see. What do we got here? 9th volume, Surah Al-Anfal. So basically goes past Surah Al-A'raf. Wow. Okay. Yeah. Goes all the way to Surah Al-Anfal. Let's see. Surah Al-Anfal, ayah what? 35? Ayah 40. Okay. So, yep, we got some work to do, inshallah. All right. Any questions? Let's see. Whisper. Al-Wahi is whisper? No. Whisper is الصوت الخافت الوشوش. Whisper is different than Wahi, because al-Wahi is more of a signal that you would get, okay? Not necessarily a whisper. Humaira, go ahead, dear.
Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, Sheikha.
Walaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.
I wanted to ask about al-hilla. You said it may lead to, I just could not get that part.
Al-hiyal.
Al-hiyal, sorry.
Al-hiyal is basically, al-hiyal is the plural, the singular is al-hila. Okay? Al-hila is manipulation. Okay? Then scholars had differences of opinions when we would use al-hiyal. And in أعلام الموقعين or إعلام الموقعين, he basically had written a chapter just on al-hiyal, manipulation. And in al-hiyal, manipulation, where we may sometimes use different interpretations in order to twist the truth, to twist the way we would read reality, or sometimes twist the text in order to match our reality. All right? That's al-hiyal. A whole different detail of al-hiyal and what does Islam say about hiyal and what about al-hiyal?
So, Sheikha, you mentioned that it leads to, you said an Arabic word there again, but I couldn't get it.
Deviation. Leads
Deviation.
to deviation. Absolutely. الضلال. When you speak about al-hiyal, it leads to dalal. Why? Because you're self-manipulating yourself. You're making yourself think that you have a good narrative and that this is basically, if you're confusing the data and you're going to be confusing the interpretation. If you're confusing the interpretation, even though you have the data in place, that's a form of hila as well. Or if you're confusing both, you're confusing reading the interpretation, you're confusing the data, and then you're confusing reading the interpretation. All right? At the end is that al-hiyal, or these manipulations, can lead you to deviation. Because if you don't have the data read right, and you don't have the data interpreted right, then you're going to fall in dalal. You're going to fall in dalal. Why are you going to fall in dalal? Because then you're going to be confusing yourself. You think that you'll create a narrative to make you not feel guilty. But then the truth of the matter is that you're deceiving yourself. If you're deceiving yourself, then you're basically putting yourself in the wrong trajectory. And then you're going to start wondering what happened. Oh, you insisted to put in a wrong interpretation. The wrong interpretation is going to lead to the wrong trajectory. Simple.
So, Sheikha, I'm so sorry. Yesterday I heard a person claiming that Ibrahim alayhi salam sold his wife in order to just get rich to Namrud as I mean, introducing her as her sister. But of course, the story is not as they claim it. So this is a dalala, right? As well.
Okay. So الحيل, if we are using hila in order to get to maqasid al-sharia, then that's a different story. So for example, just like Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam, who's that? That's my sister. And what he meant was his sister in Islam. Why? Because Namrud, he basically had an idea that he basically would want to marry and basically literally rape and take a woman's wife. That to him made sense because you're taking a woman's wife, a man's wife, and that way you're overcoming the masculinity of another man. You're overcoming the masculinity of another man. And Ibrahim alayhi salam had known this deviation that this king was living in. So he told him that this was not his wife. He didn't say she wasn't his wife. He just used what is called tawriya. What is it, tawriya? Tawriya, let me write it down. Okay, let me write that word down right here. I'll just write it right here. Okay, a tawriya is basically using a word that lets the person hearing the word think of something else. So what did Namrud think? He thought that that was his biological sister. But what did Ibrahim really mean by that? He meant by it not to lie, but he meant to say that that was his mu'mina sister in Islam. Why? Because he was trying to get to al-maqsad. He was trying to get to basically the aim. He was aiming at protecting his wife from getting raped. All right. So that's a hila that is manduhatun anil kadhib. What is manduhatun anil kadhib? That in it-tawriya, that there is something that you may sometimes use to keep you away from kadhib. Let's give an example, another example. All right. The Prophet ﷺ had permitted that a husband can lie to his wife. What type of lying? Just, hey, did you go to work? Yeah, I went to work. When in reality, he was going with his friends to a dinner party or whatever. Okay. That's not the kadhib that was allowed. This loses integrity. This loses trust to later discover that you were manipulating and you were playing games on me. That's not the kadhib that the Prophet ﷺ had permitted. But she would say, am I the only woman you ever loved? And for a woman, even though no woman, there's no such thing as a woman believing that her husband loves her. No such thing. Every woman would doubt. Trust me. Every woman doubts whether her husband loves her or not. It's not just you. It's every woman. All right? Always doubting. You know why? It actually comes from our lack of confidence in ourselves. Sorry, ladies. This is real. Women lack confidence in themselves. This is real. And that's why they won't even vote for a woman. They won't even believe in a woman because they don't believe that any woman is capable of being in any position of authority. Okay, let alone a position of having a place in her husband's heart. Okay, and her husband, she wasn't the only woman, but he didn't want to bring in more doubt, more than the doubt that she's living in anyways. So he said, yes, you are the only woman in my heart. Even though he's probably married to 3 others, but he was just making her feel comfortable. You're the only woman in my heart right now, in his mind. Right now, you're the only woman that I'm sitting with. You're the only woman in my heart currently, in his mind. So he used tawriya and not kadhib. He didn't say, you're the only woman that I love, because he probably loves his second wife and his third wife and his fourth wife. But he said, you're the only woman in my heart, meaning right now. So that's tawriya. And that's permissible. That's permissible in order to basically look at the aim. The aim is to bring happiness to this wife, for example. The aim is to protect his sister, well, basically his wife, Sarah, from getting raped by Nimrud. All right? And a tawriya is manduhatun al-kadhab, is a way to keep you away from lying, but that is only in situations where people's rights are not involved. So what does that mean? Let's say I say, Humaira, did you see Wafa take Uthman's pen? And I was clear as a judge. Did you see Wafa take Uthman's pen? I'm talking about a pen, and I'm talking about Uthman. And in your brain, you're thinking of Uthman ibn Affan, and you're like, no. Why? Because you didn't want Wafat to get it. Well, you didn't want, let's say, Wafat to get in trouble or whatever. Okay, but no. In situations where there is a qadi or a representative of qada in a situation like that, il-yamin, oath, or honesty is based on my intention and not your intention and what you're imagining the scenario to look like to avoid lying. It would be based on al-Qadi's intention. It would be based on what we all understand from this whole trial that we are currently, or at that moment, and what we're actually judging. And therefore, you cannot say, well, in my brain, I made tawriya. No, this tawriya doesn't apply here. We're actually asking involving people's rights. But a tawriya would be permissible in situations where there is no trial. Something like in the example that I gave. All right? But be careful, because many times as women, because we're afraid and we don't have the courage as much as boys do, and we don't risk as much as boys do, so we would find ways to engage in lying to avoid punishment. And this is very common. To avoid punishment, to avoid consequence, we would seek the nearest exit, which is lying. And this is very dangerous. Very dangerous. Sorry, ladies, I'm not a misogynist. I'm a woman like you. Okay. But when I say these things, it's not at all, being a misogynist. And it's basically min bab tawasaw bil haqq wa tawasaw bis sabr. It's basically from, the place of, as a woman, I would like to support one another, our sisters, my sisters, on truth, al-haqq, and as-sabr. Why is sabr? Sabr because sometimes there can be a consequence for saying truth, some pain. And that's why you would have to have the courage, meaning some level of enduring pain and enduring the consequence of saying the truth. So, yeah. Allah al-Musta'an. I hope I answered that one, dear.
Jazakallah khairan. Yes, Sheikha. I'm so sorry. I just have one last question regarding the
Go ahead.
ayah 113. And you said about the environment. We listen, and then we get pleased with it, and then we commit to it. So you said you moved from the US. Let's say that my parents did not move from a country, and I was forced, and I was in an environment. I'm not accountable in that case. Isn't that true? Because it wasn't up to me as a kid to move to another country.
You know, the Prophet ﷺ had
So,
mentioned the story of the man. He said that the man would be أشعث أغبر, مطعمه حرام ومشربه حرام وملبسه حرام فأنى يستجاب له. When he talked about this man, يطيل السفر, أشعث أغبر, and this man. Now, scholars had differences of opinions in one interpretation in this hadith. This man, يطيل السفر, is basically in this journey, and then أشعث, full of dust, his hair spiky of dust, it hasn't been combed for a couple of days, and aghbar, all of that dust basically is starting to accumulate over his skin, and yet he was making dua. He was stranded, didn't know what to do, and then مطعمه haram. Did he feed himself or was he fed haram? مشربه haram. Did he feed himself or was he fed? ملبسه haram. Same thing with everything. The food, the clothes, etc. Now, scholars had differences of opinions. If this is a child, feeding haram, will it still affect them or not? Majority of the scholars, they said, even if it's a child, it would still affect them. But why would it affect them if they are not mukallafin? They said they would still get affected, but they will not be held accountable. So what does that look like? That looks like exactly, let's say, a mother that is taking drugs. The baby is born, and they'll have to give that baby, when they are born, they would have to give them drugs. They would ask the mom, what kind of drugs were you taking? And then they would give the baby basically a certain amount to put them on a special treatment to wean them off drugs. Same thing if we're talking about alcohol. The child, if the mother is drinking, then the child is basically going to have a certain effect on their brain, on their liver, etc. Now, the effect is still there. Is the child accountable? The child is not accountable because they're underage. They're not accountable, but the implication is still there. Same thing when you talk about al-khair. The child, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in Surah Al-Kahf. In Surah Al-Kahf, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, كَانَ أَبُوهُمَا صَالِحًا. Their father or grandfather was actually good, and therefore they deserved the reward of a good deed that their father, great-grandfather, whatever, had contributed, because the good deed transcends the person. The blessing of that good deed goes beyond your age. It will affect the ages to come. Same thing with the bad deed. The bad deed will go farther than your age. It will also affect ages and generations to come. If you come from an ancestry of maybe scholars and pious people, your chance of being pious is basically higher. You come from a family that is all educated, you basically most likely are going to be educated. Your chances of being educated is much higher. So you could see that the implication that a parent, whether wrong or good, the implication goes, it transcends your era, whether in good or in evil, to generations to come. It was quite interesting, a study that was saying that even when we talk about trauma, when we speak about trauma, it goes farther than the age that the person that went through the trauma, it basically starts affecting and even affects their DNA, the makeover of their DNA and their brain, and the way that they would react to perhaps somebody's behavior. It would change it, and it would affect one generation after another. Why? Because somewhere along the lines, maybe you probably have a great-grandfather that went through trauma, and until maybe 3 generations later, this person, until now, they basically are still not understanding why they would easily get provoked, why they would relate to anything that surround them in an impulsive way. Well, it's probably generations that had passed that this person is basically, coming with a whole genetic disorder as a result of a trauma that dates back centuries back.
Sheikha, how can one break the chain?
Fair enough. Number one is be aware of it. That's number one. Sometimes you may not know that there was a trauma there that happened, or my ancestry was kafir, or whatever it is. You basically first start by recognizing إن الله لا يغير ما بقوم حتى يغيروا ما بأنفسهم. It starts with you wanting to change by putting in the effort. Putting the effort, recognize that you have this problem, that you are impulsive, that you are easily provoked, that you probably need more and more effort to study compared to perhaps your best friends, etc. You may need to put in more effort than other people because you recognize that I lack something that others may have. If you know that it is part of your genetic component that you are more susceptible to getting diabetes, to getting heart problems, to getting probably obesity, then you have to watch your diet more than your other friends that are probably, they can eat sugar and they can eat food and they can eat all these different fatty foods and still be, hey, healthy diet. Their heart is healthy. Their diet is considered healthy to them. So once you recognize that there is something within you that is basically to mean you may require more effort compared to other people that may not need the same amount of effort. If you have a higher susceptibility, a higher, basically something within your family, you guys recognize that you are a cheap family. This family is cheap. Everybody knows that this family is cheap. Well, if you know that you have this component, well, maybe you want to get closer to other people that have a different makeover. Like what? You recognize that you are cheap, and you recognize, for example, that you have this bad attitude, this bad behavior. Get to know the people that don't have this behavior and learn from them how to develop new skills in how to put it in practice. Because you wouldn't know, it's so easy to talk about hospitality and karam, Jude. It's so easy to talk about it. But if you don't live in close proximity with it, you're like, so how do we practice it? You can talk about workout, but not until you get with people that do work out and people that inspire you and people that run and people that do all of that and are so keen about what they eat and, you know, all that stuff, that eventually will rub on you. So find friends that are of that trait, and that will increase your chance by 30% or 35%, according to another study, by 30 or 35% to learning how to develop these traits by being with people that have these traits. That's number one. So in other words, salihin. Yeah, my family is not so religious and I'm not really sure how to become a religious person. I don't even know how you practice religiosity. What does it mean to be religious? Surround yourself with religious people. Just see how they speak and see how they dress and see how they live with each other, and just basically surround yourself with it. You'll increase your chance by 30%. Then learn more about it. Take the time to learn. Take the time to research about it. What do we mean research? Research how the implication of, let's say, eating wrong will affect my heart, will affect my, I don't know, my life, etc., my opportunity for getting a job or whatever it is, and learn about that and the implications of that. And then the pros and the advantages that if I were to change this habit, the advantages are going to be coming to me with 1, 2, 3, 4. So not only am I learning how to let this trait become as a part of me, but I'm also learning mental education, the pros and cons of this wrong behavior, or at least the cons of the wrong behavior, and the pros and the advantages of the good behavior. So then I'm now not only mirroring a behavior, but I'm also having the vision of it. Number 3, after having the vision of it, now how do I stay consistent? It's not, okay, I know the importance of working out. I know the importance of going to the masjid. I know the importance of learning Islam. How do I stay consistent is the question. Staying consistent, number 1, don't take large portions of change all at once. Take it little by little and stay consistent with little by little, smaller portions. That's a lot easier than taking a whole dramatic and a whole drastic change. A whole complete change, you might be capable of committing to it 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, maybe a week. But then at one point you're like, oh, I can't do this anymore. You get back to your old self. So to stay committed, take it smaller portions. Don't jump into a bigger challenge. The bigger challenge is going to make you go weaker. So smaller portions, change your environment, change basically the situation as much as you can that you are in, and bring in friends that are committed. Little by little, you'll find yourself getting there with that commitment to, with that change, and you'll see it mirroring on you little by little, inshallah. We don't just talk about, it's all about grit. Okay. Grit is the key to successes, even in faith. It's grit. It's being committed. It's staying in that perseverance for a longer term and not for a day or 2 or 3. That's grit. So if you are capable of doing, let's say, 20 minutes of, I don't know, memorizing or reading Quran, it's better than taking 1 day and deciding to read the whole Quran in one setting, in one shot. No, take 20 minutes per day. That's it. 20 minutes. You're like, you know what? I sit on my phone for these many hours. I'm just going to sit 20 minutes per day just to try to read a juz'u. Just 20 minutes. Every single day. Just 20 minutes. That's it. 20 minutes. I'm not going to do much, just 20 minutes. Okay. Staying 20 minutes per day, let's say for a whole month, just 20 minutes. That's going to enable you to add another 5 minutes the following month. And perhaps 2 years later, you're probably going to be at an hour, 20 minutes, and then later continue to add 5 extra minutes every month. Then you're going to find yourself at a different place. I hope I answered that one.
Jazakallah khairan, yes, Sheikha. And lastly, we mentioned about the 3 stages. And let's assume not myself, but someone else is in the second stage, and he or she's been pleased with that. Is there a U-turn? And I mean, to prevent him or her committing that sin or the thing that's not pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
There's always a U-turn, dear. I mean, there's always a U-turn unless the person got, on their deathbed. And unless the person basically lived long enough until the sun is basically going on the other and rising from the west. So as long as we didn't go that far, then there's always a chance of U-turn. And I'd seen many cases, the Prophet said, إن أحدكم لا يعمل بعمل أهل النار حتى ما يكون بينه وبينها إلا ذراع فيسبق عليه الكتاب فيعمل بعمل أهل الجنة فيدخلها. The Prophet had said in the hadith that one will do the action of the people of hellfire, and then they would be just an arm reach at the threshold to Jahannam. نسأل الله العفو والعافية. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَيَسْبِقُ عَلَيْهِ الْكِتَابِ. The truth and the reality of what they conceal on the inside, it basically goes to the surface. And then they would do the actions of the people of Ahlul Jannah. And then they would enter Jannah. And same thing. Somebody might do the actions of the people of Jannah throughout their life. فِيمَا يَبْدُو لِلنَّاسِ, to what appears to people that this person, excellent person, memorize the Quran, mashallah, go into the masjid, mashallah, just exceptional people. And then just a short while. And then what happens? A short while before their death. What happens? What do? Well, they basically change. They flip completely into becoming a pious person. But yeah, you had a history of right there with crime and drugs and the list goes on and on. But then they repented. Rabbi Kabir. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives them repentance. And same thing, a person, they could have been these people that, mashallah, they were praying, they were doing everything that is good. But the truth of the matter is that they were actually hypocrites. And then, boom, the reality of who they are. These people change into people that are hypocrites, people that are completely different just before the time of their death. A month, 2 months, a year, everything changed. نسأل الله العفو والعافية نسأل الله العفو والعافية اللهم يا مثبت القلوب ثبت قلوبنا على دينك. I hope I answered that question, dear.
Jazakallah khairan. Thank you very much, Sheikha.
Allah يبارك فيك يا ربي. If there are any questions, any other questions or comments, I'd love to listen to them.
Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Aisha.
Wa alaikum assalam.
In ayah 117, when in ربك هو أعلم بمن ضل عن سبيل yes, man yudillu an sabili, and there's another ayah that we did that is biman ضل عن سبيل.
Yes, of course. There is another ayah. When you look at man yudillu is different than man ضل. Man ضل is past. Man yudillu in present. So whoever, the present there, ما يضل عن سبيله وهو أعلم بالمهتدين. ما يضل عن سبيله right now. Whoever is misguided right now. من ضل in the past. And the Lord Almighty is basically to let us know that He is beyond time. So during the present and during the past is all equal to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Basically, the difference is one is the past, that is the one, and this one is the present.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
No, جزاك الله.
وإياكم. This is it, everybody. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نستغفرك ونتوب إليك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت. Oh wow, we really passed the time.